Okay, so I'll kick it off. I'll introduce myself. I'm Mark Lawrence, regional chairman of the planning committee and member of the First and Upper Midwest board and a couple other boards around First and a Woody Flowers Award winner from 2015 and part of the Green Machine. And you're really here today to talk about changes that we've been making to the chairman's award, and we'll talk about how that process has happened and why we're doing it and what the changes are. So yeah, I think you'll be quite pleased at what you see. We will use the chat. Lori's going to monitor the chat. So if you've got questions as we go along, we'll follow those, but we are going to leave time for a Q&A at the end. And we'll do that to make sure you get all your answers done. Also, just the time frame on this, because we are going to award the chairmans this year, we're not sure how that will be done. It will be judged remotely. We're not, because right now we're not having an event. There's some discussion about how we'll actually divide up the country and the teams and award based on that. So that's to come, and I'm assuming we may not hear about that until kickoff. So we'll see where that goes. Anyways, it opens up November 19th for your submission, so you can get in and start working on it. And then the February 25th is the closing date. And I always tell people, why don't you just back it up and say the closing date's the 20th, because everybody always has a problem of actually getting their submissions in for whatever reason. They cut and paste and it doesn't carry through very well, and there's always something. So make sure you get that done. So let's jump to our panel. As I mentioned this in the overall session when we first got in, but having Zoom is a really unique opportunity here because we've got teams in this session that normally would not come to JUMPSTART. It's a real thrill to be able to have teams from Canada, Australia, and Florida, which, this time of year, we would never be thinking of coming to Minnesota. And, we can have them online and enjoy their experience and hear from them on how they've approached this. So we've really got a worldwide session, which is pretty unique for this kind of environment. So let's just, we'll jump to the Green Machine and let them introduce themselves and give me a little bit about why you think you were picked for the Hall of Fame and maybe one thing that your team does that's unique. So let's just start with Rachel.
All right. So I'm Rachel. I'm representative. I'm a alumni mentor from Team 1816, the Green Machine. One of the things that the Green Machine likes to highlight when asked this question is our commitment to our core values. So after a rough season in 2016, 2017 timeframe, developed our new mission and core values, and that really propelled us forward to really concentrate on who we are and what we wanted to do.
Okay, Lori?
I'm Lori Shimizu. I'm one of the founding mentors of Team 1816, the Green Machine. And to add to what Rachel says, we really have leveraged, we've used those core values, we've used the mission to inform everything that we do as a team. And that has allowed us to focus what we'd like to do in terms of our engineering outreach.
Okay, now we're going to go to Oink Oink.
Boom.
Exploding Bacon, team from Orlando, Florida. They were the 2019 Hall of Fame winners. Elise, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Elise. I was a marketing and awards mentor for Exploding Bacon, and I would say probably the thing that really stood out to the judges was the well-roundedness of Exploding Bacon. Definitely our imagery, but we're able to leverage that into other areas with the First Like a Girl campaign, and really involved in our first community, our local community, and just really focused on how we can help other teams. So being well-rounded, I think, was a big part of that.
Great. Okay, now we're actually going to jump a day ahead. And we're going to go to Sunday and welcome Thunder Down Under from Sydney, Australia.
Hello, I'm Sarah. And I'm Luann. We're both from 3132 Thunder Down Under. We were both mentors on the team when we won in 2017. I'm also an alum of the team, and we've been around with the team. Well, we helped found it back in 2010. So I think one of the things that was really big for 3132 and entering the Hall of Fame was just the extent of everything we had done and the international impact that the team had had, whether it was helping start first in FRC in so many different countries, or really bringing it to low income and rural areas across Australia through our Robots in the Outback program. Those are the things I think really stood out the most. And growing first here in Australia itself. You know, when the team started, there were about 20 FLL teams. Now, well, before COVID hit, there were about 2,000. What she said.
Great. And then the final team, Simbiotics, was noted mostly as a robot team. You know, anybody that's done any research on how to build a robot, you'll find Karthik's name around it. And, you know, he'll tell you their story because I think it's pretty unique. So Karthik, you want to just take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You know, 1114, we got started way back 2003, 2004. And, you know, initially with the vision of the team, the goal was, you know, to win a world championship. And then, you know, we saw some of the teams that we were really looking up to, that Team 67, the Hot Team, Team 254, the Cheesy Poofs, get into the Hall of Fame. And so we said, okay, well, that's our goal too. But we didn't really know how to go about it. And I think for the first few years, you know, we were successful winning local chairman's awards, but we were doing it trying to be something we weren't. We were trying to emulate all these other teams who were, you know, doing various community outreach events and raids and that sort of stuff. And it wasn't who we were, and our kids weren't really enjoying it. So I think what was important for us was to, we kind of shifted. We told all the students, it's like, okay, we're only going to do stuff that you all want to do. And if that gets us into the Hall of Fame, that's great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, because at least we're going to be who we are and, you know, following what we love. And as such.
Oop, okay, lost Karthik.
You back? Karthik, you're muted.
I think I'm back.
You're back.
That was really that was really weird there. But Mark, where did I get stopped there? I'll blaze through.
Just talking about changes to the team and not, you know, having built a robot and you needed more to do.
Right, and you know, my internet connection is a little bit unstable here, so maybe we can jump to the next person. But I'll just say it's about being who your team is and sticking to your core values and your identity. And our identity, the robot team, we just decided to share everything we did with the robot and put all our information out there when it came to scouting, designs that were simple so teams could, you know, really get started from the basics. But we just shared everything we could do as much as we could to get resources out there. And that was kind of our journey to the Hall of Fame.
Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. So let's, you know what, Karthik, I'm going to jump to you on this one to talk about the group and how it's put together and the process.
Yeah, so one of the big things that the Hall of Fame has been working on over the last couple of years is some changes to how the judging works with the Chairman's Award. And we've been really fortunate that the Chief of Judge Advisors and FRC Headquarters was willing to collaborate with us on this. And so, you know, if you think about where FRC was 10 years ago and where we are now, things are different. Society is different, our teams are different, the culture is different. And that's a good thing because, you know, we're trying to achieve culture change. But the Chairman's Award itself and the criteria hadn't really evolved. And so that's what we were involved in with the judges, helping evolve the criteria to best represent the needs of our current teams and kind of make sure that the judging criteria and the executive summary questions were relative to teams who are submitting today in our current.
Thanks. Let's go to the next slide. Lise, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so why we're making these changes and why now? Well, the as it says, the focus was to pivot towards questions that are more relevant, and it's just a natural progression. There's not any reason, just that's why. So sorry, was I supposed to be taking the next question on the sum? on the next one?
No, I think I'll do a little intro to it.
Okay.
Several years ago, first set out their pillars. And when the group was looking at changing the questions and stuff, they really wanted to they wanted to reflect what the pillars were. And for those of you that don't know, the first pillars are expand participation, improve equity, diversity, and inclusion, scale the programs efficiently, i.e., can we get into all the schools? And if we do that, how do we do it? Ensure sustainability. So, it's one thing to start teams, and it's another thing to continue keeping the teams going. And finally, achieve broad recognition so that, people talk about FRC Robotics like they talk about football teams or baseball teams or those kinds of things. So those are the first pillars. So let's see, I'll just let Sarah and Luann jump to this one.
Was it this?
Slide is still coming up in Australia. There we go. All right. So we wanted to change, some of the overall focus to focus on those pillars, like Mark said. So there are a few different things that leads to when you put it into the context of the questions. And I think all of it ends up coming back to something Rachel and Karthik have both already talked on, which is making sure that each team in their unique environment can be recognized for that environment and in that environment. So it's not a numbers game. It's not an arms race. It's not who has started the most first teams, not who has reached the most number of people. It really takes into recognition that a team in suburban Sydney, to use an Australian reference, is going to be able to reach a lot more people than a team in the middle of the outback. And we want to recognize both those teams for all the work and effort they put in. And that's going to look good.
Yeah, and I think it's also about making sure that every team has the ability to tell their own story. I think that's something that someone mentioned already, is that you need to be authentic. And, people remember stories. People remember that. And I think that a lot of times in the past, teams were too focused on statistics and very data-oriented things. And this allows them to move to being able to share those unique individual stories, which are what make FRC great.
Perfect, thanks. Next slide, please. So now we're gonna jump into 15 changes that have been made to the Chairman's Award. So this is really the meat of the presentation, and we'll have each of the panel members take a different section to talk about something that they're passionate about and very involved in making those changes. So I'll turn it to you, Rachel. You can just jump in.
All right, so the first question, you can see on each of the slide, we'll have the 2020 version so that you can see directly what it was and what it will be. So the focus of this question, it was pretty unclear, and you would get these essays back and you would read the first question and you don't really know who the team is. So this question added some more details and expanded to better clarify what judges were looking for. And that really, we want to take that question and use your characters there to put your team into context. So talk about, where are you located? How many people are on your team? What does your team look like? Those types of things to help set into context everything else that will come.
Okay, next slide, Karthik.
Yeah, so this one is probably the biggest change because it ties into so many of the other changes. So the original question was, describe the impact of the FRC program on your community within the last 5 years. So that was, a lot of teams just kind of ran off a list of things that they did. But was that really informative? Probably not. So the new question is, describe your community along with how your team addresses unique opportunities and circumstances. So what this is saying is that every team belongs to a community and every community is different. And Luann and Sarah touched on this earlier. Saying that we started one FRC team has a very different meaning if you are in an urban affluent center compared to a rural center or an urban disadvantaged center. And so, if you're the only team within 200 miles of you and you start another team in your area somehow, that's big, and that's worth mentioning. And not that starting one team in an urban center isn't worth mentioning, but there's these unique circumstances behind it. And as we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, especially the equity piece, it was hard for teams who were from these areas where they had unique circumstances because they had to give up characters in their essay to describe these circumstances specifically and to illustrate why their accomplishments leveled up with teams in different areas or with different advantages and differences. And by allowing this question to exist, it gives teams a specific area to address these circumstances. And this is very similar to what a lot of you students will be seeing on your university applications. As we're trying to, as colleges and universities are trying to deconstruct privilege, they're giving students an opportunity to talk about their circumstances in a separate area. So you're not having to, you're not already behind in this race, which you might be behind in different areas. So this was really important to allow teams to showcase their unique situation without giving up these characters. So you're saying, what could I put in this? And it's up to you. But what are the things that makes being a part of your community easier? What are the things that make being part of your community harder? That's okay to talk about too. We're talking all sides of it, opportunities and disadvantages that could be presented.
Great. Okay. Next one, Luann. Sarah.
So this one used to talk about, excuse me.
So this one used to just really focus on how you were spreading the first message. And that's great, but spreading it with no impact is kind of pointless at the end of the day. So we added in, how does your team measure this? That's the really big change here. I think this is something that your team should always be thinking about, is how can you measure what you're doing? How can you show the impact? And that can be numbers, or it can be stories, like we said before. So both of those are very relevant ways of measuring them, but we just want to see, I think the judges want to see really how you are measuring it and know that you are impact oriented.
I think this really relates also into where the students are headed into the future. Most companies are using SMART goals right now, and that's all about measurable impact, right? And so this is just a great opportunity for teams to start thinking about that and to give students the skills that they need going into the workforce.
Thanks. One thing I will mention as we move through this, you'll notice that most of the time frames have gone from 5 years to 3 years. There's a recognition that very few team members that would actually be presenting to the judges would have been around for 5 years on an FRC team. So that's kind of a reflection of sort of current as is within a team. So, all right, next one, Lori.
So this particular question is designed to inspire your team to really think about not just how you are creating your team internally, but what have you extended? What have you shared outside of your team? And how have you perhaps inspired others to join you in these efforts? And it's an attempt again. Remember to keep in mind that our time frame is now just 3 years. So your team members should be able to talk about things they are actually doing. And having said that, it could be something that the team perhaps started 5 years, 10 years before, but your current team has certainly iterated on it. They've improved it. They've evolved it. Maybe they've thrown it out and started again, but it's an opportunity to really talk about how they're taking what they have learned, extended into the community, and in that regard, acted as role models for the rest of us. Next slide. And this one again, we wanted to give teams more opportunities within the format of the executive summaries to talk about truly all of the different things and unique things that the team is doing. So this is truly a consolidation question. There used to be multiple questions that you can see on the right-hand side. They were teasing it apart so finely that many teams just said, I have no idea what to put in this space. But this is an attempt now to perhaps inspire you to shorten what you say to this one area and really focus on the definitions of what does it mean to assist, mentor, and or start other FIRST teams. This is one of the questions, as I say, that had 4 different ways to do this. Now it's just one, so that you can use your characters and space in different ways.
Let's jump to the next slide.
Yeah, and expanding on what Lori said for the last slide is that so much of the focus on the Chairman's Award over the past few years has been people have been starting teams, starting teams, starting teams. And by condensing that, I think it's kind of to show teams, because before, if you just, we're all, problem solvers in this program. And if you think about, first, like you get a game manual for the robot and you try and like figure out what they're asking you to do. That's what you get the game manual. It's like, okay, what exactly am I supposed to do with a robot? But teams do the same thing with chairmen. And so when they saw 5 questions about starting teams, the thought is, oh, we better be starting teams, and that's the focus. And so this was part of the shift, because that wasn't actually what the focus was supposed to be on. And so there's this new question. Beyond starting teams, what initiatives have you done to help inspire young people to be science, technology leaders, and innovators? So we're talking about, there's now a specific area for other stuff that you've done that's not starting teams. And remember, starting teams has always been like starting FIRST team. So this could be anything. If you have a library program that's using Arduinos or Raspberry Pis and kids are learning that way, here's where you mention it. Before, people were cautious about this stuff. Like, well, it's not a FIRST library program. Are we allowed to talk about it? Of course you're allowed to talk about it. And this is where you can do it. And I feel like almost, every team in the Hall of Fame and almost every team everywhere has other initiatives, because robots is more than FIRST. 1902 Exploding Bacon had, FIRST Like a Girl, and Spark, these sorts of programs. Thunder Down Under has done all sorts of amazing things across Australia that aren't necessarily tied into the conventional ideas of starting teams. Like on 1114, we were on a bunch of TV shows, like we were on Degrassi and we were on LA Confidential. So those sorts of things talked about it in this space. So just think about this, but also the second part of the question, which is important, what results have you seen from your? It's not suffice just to talk about what the initiative was, but what has the initiative actually accomplished? We're looking for tangible impact here. So that's what this question is about.
Thank you. Okay, Sarah, Luann.
This is one of the changes that looks minor at the beginning, but I'm actually really, really excited about, because I think it gives teams an opportunity to take a question that before was a little bit fluffy and really deep dive into it. So before, I was just asking you to describe your corporate and university sponsors, and that's incredibly vague and hard to answer. And I know on 30 and 32, when we were filling it out each year, we would say, well, like one of our major sponsors is Google. What are we supposed to say? They're a big internet company, they're a search engine. Like that doesn't seem useful. I'm assuming the judges already know what Google is. And so now this is an opportunity to really talk about how you're partnering with these groups to expand STEM and FIRST and have a broader impact.
Yeah, and I think the second piece of this is really important, and it sort of mirrors what we've seen in all the other questions so far, which is talk about the measurable impact. What have you accomplished together in the last 3 years? It's not about, like Sarah says, the fluffy things. It's about what is measurable and what have you actually accomplished as a team working together.
Great, thanks. Next slide. We'll jump back to Karthik.
Thank you, Mark. So, Mark earlier described what the first strategic pillars were. And one of those pillars is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's a really important, it's been an important topic in our society forever, but now only over the last few years, it's really come to the forefront of people's attention. And that's a good thing, because this is something that's important. It's just basic things that we need to be doing as human beings, where we're putting everyone on the same level, we're encouraging diverse groups, and we're including everyone in our communities. And so this question flat out calls out, describe your team's efforts in the past 3 years to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion within your team, within FIRST, and within your communities. So a lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to be like, oh, I don't know what we've been doing. And that's not necessarily a bad answer, because maybe you've internalized and just you're naturally promoting these sorts of things. But it's important to kind of really do a deep dive to figure out what your team has done in this area. And if the answer is nothing, that'll be acceptable for one season. But if the next season you're saying nothing again, that's showing that you haven't taken steps to grow in this area. So again, we mentioned Exploding Bacon's First Like a Girl program. This is a program that was designed to really, to address the systematic inequalities that girls deal with in first, and to promote their involvement and give them a stage and a platform where they can, be, function in this program equitably. And so these sorts of things are like really cool things you could do, but it could be just as simple as doing recruiting events with non-traditional demographics for your team. You look at your team's demographics and what it's been like, and you compare it to your community demographics, and you realize, oh wait, our team, this group is underrepresented on our team, and then doing a recruiting event for a group that targets that. These are the basic sorts of things that are talked about specifically in the first ED&I training that your teams can be doing to address this question. But this is a really important one, because forget about the chairman's award and trying to win this award and trying to get into the Hall of Fame. Your team will be stronger if it promotes equity, diversity, and inclusion, and it's the right thing to do. That's something Woody always talked about. When you have these double wins where it's the right thing to do and it's going to make your team stronger, why aren't you doing them? And if you aren't, you're hurting yourself and you're hurting your communities, your team first. So it's really important to think about. This question is going to be a big change for teams this year, but I think this is really one that's important for reflection, not just about the Chairman's Award, and every team should be reflecting. That's cool.
And just to dovetail to that, Karthik, it's also an opportunity for teams not only to reflect on what they have done, but this is a very much a, let's be honest with ourselves and with our team. Diversity, inclusion can cover a very, very wide range of what that means. And this is designed to prompt you as your team, again, to tell your team's story. And this is where you can take risks and as Dean just said, fail miserably over and over and over again. And this is an opportunity to really talk about that. Maybe your team has made efforts in this area and have just come up with, despite 5 years of trying, you really cannot figure out how to reach a particular population in your school, in your community. This is your space. This is your time to really talk about that. And it's one of the most important changes.
Yeah,
in our executive summaries.
I'm going to close out of this slide with just one comment. Dr. Imogen Coe, who's one of the ED&I champions across Canada, she's consulted on so many different topics and is a large supporter of FIRST Robotics. She always says, you can never have change without discomfort. And this question may cause some discomfort on your team, but that's okay, because it's how your team's going to grow, evolve, and become stronger.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Next slide. Rachel?
All right, so another new question focused more specifically on sustainability. So how are you as a team ensuring that your initiatives that you've started and created are going to continue to run effectively for the foreseeable future? So pivoting to focus on sustainability, one of the things I think we're almost done with all of our new questions, but you should be using these questions as kind of a prompting to reflect on your team. So I know you can read previous essays, and Bacon's essay, they talked about doing an annual strategic planning meeting. So you should be able to take questions like this and plug them into other aspects of how you run your team. So can you use some of these to create a SWOT for your business plan? And really, these should all come together as an annual report for your team and serve as a roadmap. And this is another good question to kickstart some of those discussions.
Thanks. We'll go to the next one, and I think Elise is going to take this one.
Yes. So whereas the previous one on your sponsors was about talk about your sponsors and your relationships, who those are, this one gives you a little bit more time to talk about those relationships a little more in depth. And I know we struggle as with chairmans on what do all these questions mean. That's one of the reasons that it was reworded a bit to give a little bit more prompting to help teams figure out how to talk about those relationships with those sponsors. So how do you recruit, retain, and engage your sponsors? And it gives you that chance to talk about those relationships, those efforts that you're doing in the community. So it just helps identify that a little bit better.
Great. Next slide. I think what people will be noticing now is how much broader the responses are going to be, and also the effect of planning and how important that is to making changes on your team. So you'll see in the next few slides that that's the direction we're going. Let's see, Sarah and Luann.
This might be one of my favorite questions. When I think back about Woody, and I think back about all of the things that he said, one of my favorite things that he always emphasized was we get what we celebrate. And I think a lot of times we don't celebrate enough the things that might not have gone right. As Larry mentioned, he talks about all the time as well. Sometimes the best things that happen are the things that are incredible failures. If I look back at 3132, for everything that we did right, we probably had 2 or 3 tries ahead of time that just went horribly wrong. And it's really important to be able to take those things, to be able to talk about them, and what did you learn from them? This isn't about just the successes that a team has. It really is about taking those problems, those areas that you do need to improve, and being persistent and think about it. And that's where the real meat of FIRST is, right? It's about making sure that you are persistent and you keep going until you do succeed, but you won't get there unless you have those crazy ideas that just fail. And if you ever want to have a really fun time, we should post an hour where we talk about the things we did that were just really, really dumb in retrospect.
I think I can see heads nodding here, and
Oh, we specialize in dumbness, trust me.
Yep. We've had some real failures.
they're amazing. Like they have so many successes, right? Whether it's Fairground 32 was Robots in the Outback, 1114 was on Degrassi. Every Hall of Fame team, like they have these amazing programs, and at least I can't speak for everyone else here, but for 3132, I think the only reason we had successes was because we had more failures than anyone else as well. And yeah, bad ideas, but we always found a way to turn them into the good. And that's what this question allows you to do. And it goes back to that be uncomfortable that Karthik said. This is a moment to be really honest with the judges and say, we had this great idea and it didn't pan out, but here's how we want to pivot for the 2022 season.
Okay, next slide. Karthik.
Yeah, so this one is very basic, but it's interesting. For years at the championship, there was one question the judges like to ask teams, and sometimes it trickled down to the regional events, but it was very simple. Why do you deserve the chairman's award? And some teams, this was a hard question to answer, because if you think about it, in our first community, we preach humility and not, overly boastful displays. But at the same time, if you deserve the chairman's award, you need to be able to tell the judges why you do. And so this executive summary question is basically a translation of that. Describe your team's goals that fulfill the mission of FIRST and the progress you have made towards those goals. Because remember what the mission of FIRST is. It's about changing culture. And so what has your team done to change culture, and what progress have you made towards that? What do you want to do, and what have you accomplished? Because no one team's going to be able to say, it's like, well, we've changed culture completely and there's no more need for FIRST. We're done. We're out. The program's over. So no one's going to be at that point. But you've got to explain what your step-by-step systematic goals are towards that and what progress you've made. So this is really answering the question, why do you deserve the chairman's award? And I think it's a great question for any team. Remember, lots of teams are going to submit. Only a very few each year are going to win this award. But everyone should be able to look at the progress they've made and view that as a success and that as their own internal team win. So this question is almost like, what have we done? Like, by answering this question, getting something down on paper, I know this is going to sound so freaking trite. I almost hate it that I'm saying it, but it's like you've almost won here by putting this on paper and you saying this is part of your presentation. So it's a good question.
Okay, next slide. Elise.
All right, so this one expands what the wording was on an existing question, and it was a very vague, incredibly vague question before, just briefly describe other matters of interest to the FIRST judges. And well, a team that can seem very daunting. What is of interest, other interest to the judges? We would often talk, I believe we often talked about imagery in this question because it was something that didn't fit in where it might fit in now with some of the newer questions. But there are a lot of different things that teams do that are very unique just very specific to that team. It may not even be unique. It might just be something you're really proud of, but it didn't really fit in anywhere else. So, each of these questions are only about 500 characters. So it's really hard to get in what you're trying to say, and you really have to be tight with your answers. So it can be very difficult to get in all of those things that you want to say in these questions. And this is that chance, that one more chance to put in something else that is really special about your team that you really want to share that just didn't fit in somewhere else.
Great. Okay, so that sort of the changes. Well, there's a few things that were taken away, and we'll just jump to the next slide and let Lori talk about those.
Yeah, these questions will not appear any longer in the executive summaries, again, because we felt that First Overall has evolved and that teams have evolved, and we were freeing up the space to give teams the opportunity to talk about what they are doing, who they are, how they're moving through all of the things that they do, and to just literally create more time and space for more specific and directed prompts and questions.
Great. Okay, let's see. So we'll let Luann and Sarah or maybe even Karthik talk about this slide a little bit. And then I think rather than going through all the definitions, you'll be able to read them, and we'll jump to Q&A after this. So I don't know, Sarah, Karthik, which one wants to take this one?
I'll start, and
okay.
Sarah backed me up here. But so the definitions came together. The Hall of Fame worked on these, 5-6 years ago now. And part of the issue is that lots of teams were using words in their essays, but they had different meanings. So, language is precise, words matter, but teams were using the word, for example, mentored in very different ways. Some teams were saying, like one team I saw, they said, we mentored 500 teams this year. And that doesn't sound realistic to me, but the way they were defining the term mentored was they thought, because 500 people had read something that was on their website, they thought that they had mentored all of them. While another team thinks of mentored as being something very specific. So the idea was that the judges wanted to give specific definitions to these sorts of words, like started a team, mentored, assisted. So teams would be using common language, so it would be easier for judges to compare. What do you think?
Yeah, that sets the background very well, because that was when 3132 entered the Hall of Fame, just after those definitions had come out. And I know as a team, they were incredibly helpful because they just set that framework, and they meant everyone was using the words in the same way. There was no more, well, did we start that team or did we just assist that team? Like you knew what it all meant, and it was very easy to fit into the framework. The changes this year are mostly just an update and a clarification. So assist, you could assist a team and a event, and that was kind of confusing because they had different definitions. So we've changed those words around. That way each word has a precise meaning, and we no longer have dual definitions of words. And probably the most important thing is we added a definition for the word advocacy. All these changes, as Mark said, are on the website, and I think we're going to go through them very, very briefly here. But also, we still have the documentation form, which teams should be using. It's still optional for the 2021 season, but it's just a really great way for your team to show the judges that, hey, we really did do all this stuff. This is something, a lot of teams have been doing for years, is already showing, this is the list of teams that we mentored. And the documentation form just gives you a really tangible way in a format that's, everyone's using the same format. So it's, again, easy for the judges to see. And just really the proof is in the pudding, and this is the pudding.
Great. Let's just jump down to slide 26, just because it's new, and we'll let Rachel talk about advocacy.
All right, so relevant to a lot of teams in Minnesota, I think I'm looking at a lot of the numbers here. A lot of you have been to the advocacy day at the state capitol. So this is a word, again, we thought was not well defined, and now we have a definition, and you can read the exact definition here, but the main points that we wanted to make was that it's not, advocacy is not just a one-off. It's not just a check the box done. You're meeting with different people. They don't all have to be like elected. They could be your community leaders, your school principal, maybe even a sponsor, a business leader, or their staff, and engaging them in creating change. So it's here's some great examples of what it is and what it's not. So we want it to be an active event, not just using, social media, volunteering for like campaign, hosting a table. It's you're actually doing something, you're attending an advocacy day, you're working on with those leaders to promote maybe a bill or a proposal change. So if any of you have engaged in the STEM advocacy days or the National Advocacy Conference, take a look at this definition for your submission this year.
Let's see, let's jump to the end. Elise, you want to wrap it up and talk about our website?
Oh, just if you want to see this, the slides for this presentation, again, you can go to firsthalloffame.org and just go into our blog, and there is an article about this presentation and a link to the PowerPoint to download it. And if you have any questions, you can reach us at firsthalloffame@gmail.com.
Great, thank you. Let's see, let's just open up. We got about 5 minutes for questions. So if you got a question, let's just hear from you.
Yeah, and don't be shy. Feel free to just drop question in chat. We'd love to engage with all of you.
There's been a lot of effort put into this, and we're hoping that you'll like the changes when it comes time to actually submitting your responses for the award.
And I think one of the things about the changes is, as much as this was, an effort driven by the judges in the Hall of Fame, like this was done based on community feedback. And all the Hall of Fame members are active members in the FIRST community, and we saw what other teams were saying, and we saw the complaints, and we realized that if we wanted to keep the Chairman's Award as the most prestigious award in FIRST, it was important to make these changes.
All right, so we have one question. What would be the difference between answering the questions directly to putting it in a story? I think Sarah and Luann, you had the best answer to talking about putting it into a story, but also using results.
Yeah, so I think that when we say a story, we're not talking about, at least I'm personally don't mean you need to talk about how your team, one year we compared ourselves to the Southern Cross. You don't need to that kind of a story, but it's instead the stories of the impact you've had on people. So we would tell stories. We had, back when we started FTC in Australia, one of the very first teams we had was of students who had some disabilities. And one of the parents, after driving their kid home from the competition, asked them if they'd enjoyed the event, and they said it was the best day of their life. And their dad asked why, and they said for the first time ever they felt normal. And so that's an example of a story that you could tell that really shows the impact, right? And so yes, we may have only had 6 FTC teams in the country, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but we went from 0 to 6, which is big, and we had this amazing story we could tell about the true impact the program had had. So I think that's what we say when we mean stories of impact.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing you need to realize is you only have a few characters for these questions. And so there are some questions that lend themselves more to trying to put a very, very short story in. Sometimes though, that may be better to put into your essay or into your presentation. So just remember you only have a few characters for these questions. And if you can't get the impact of the story across in those, I think it's 500 characters, then don't shortchange yourself.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of putting stories in the essay, or even more so in the presentation, because the story that Sarah just told, her intonation really sold it. And that's something that's so hard to catch. Now, there's talented writers out there who can do that beautiful sort of stuff in an essay, but they're few and far between. It's much easier to tell an emotional story and convey that impact by a voice. And when you're connecting with the judges, either in person or like this year, you'll be doing by a web conference.
And it's really hard to do that when you're concerned about 500 characters. So the executive summaries are not generally a good place to tell a story, but there's such a wide variety. I highly recommend looking at past submissions of the different styles. We use bullet points. I know a lot of people didn't, but when you have a lot of information to convey, sometimes it's better to use the bullet points, but sometimes you can get in a little story. Some people have done it really well.
Yeah. We have more time, and it doesn't look like we have any other questions at the moment. I can tell one more story about stories.
That's recursive.
Go for it.
Had a student, one of the other projects we did that's lesser well known, especially outside Australia, is we did a lot of work with water safety and a water safety charity here in Australia to prevent drownings. And when the students on the team, we didn't even know this until we were working on the presentation about why she'd been so passionate about this. She said, well, you know, when I was 12, I saved my sister from a riptide. And we were like, oh, and so she ended up telling the story about why she was so passionate about this project is because she'd saved her sister from a riptide when she was 12. And so this was in the presentation the year we won championship chairmans. And it was a year later, we were doing some stuff for a team in Boston. And one of the chairman's judges was on the panel with us talking about the award. And we tell the story about the impact of stories and how we had this one in our presentation. And the judge says, I'm gonna have to stop you right there. I was one of your judges at championship and I still remember that story. So never doubt the power of a story to convey the message over statistics, right? Everyone's got the big numbers. What's the difference between reaching 1 million people and 5 million people? It sounds very similar, but being able to tell that story really makes you unique in the judge's eyes.
It's like that old quote, they may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yes. We had one of our students, we we generally tried to get in little snippets of stories in our presentation. And with one of our students, we had decided to let one of the boys talk about First Like a Girl, which it sounds kind of a little bit unusual. I had 2 girls and a boy in the presentation room, but the boy said, I really want to talk about this. And if you ever get a chance to look at the Boys of 1902 First Like a Girl video, oh my gosh. It really, I love those boys. They're just amazing. But he had 4 sisters. He had 4 younger sisters. And First Like a Girl was so important to him. And he really wanted to express that. And it just made such an impact to me that he had to share it in the room. The stories can go beyond what the numbers are for a social media campaign and really get to the heart of why you're doing something.
Great. I'm gonna have to interrupt here and end things. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the attendees for coming and enjoying this with us. Also, if you know the website now, so if you've got questions, we're there to answer questions and we're there to help. So reach out to us, and if we can't answer it, we'll find somebody that can. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you at the next sessions.